In just 34 seconds, the most powerful political alliance in the Western world crumbled. Donald Trump didn't extend his hand for the traditional diplomatic handshake. He didn't offer the customary words of partnership. He simply looked directly into Ursula von der Leyen's eyes and delivered two words that would reshape global politics forever. Absolutely not. The cameras captured everything. The European Commission president's face went pale. Her carefully prepared delegation froze in stunned silence. What had von der Leyen proposed that made the President of the United States deliver the most brutal diplomatic rejection in modern history? The scene unfolded at exactly 2:47 p.m. Eastern Time in the Roosevelt Room of the White House. Von der Leyen had arrived with a 37-page proposal titled Transatlantic Partnership 2025, a new framework for shared prosperity. She carried with her the hopes of 27 European nations and a $450 billion economic package designed to strengthen U.S.-EU ties. What she didn't anticipate was walking into what intelligence sources are now calling a carefully orchestrated political ambush. Trump had done his homework. As von der Leyen began her presentation about continued cooperation on climate initiatives and defense spending, the president interrupted her mid-sentence. "Ursula," he said, using her first name in a tone that sent chills through the room. "We need to talk about the real numbers." He then produced a classified dossier marked European Financial Obligations, Outstanding Balance. The document, according to sources present in the room, contained itemized calculations dating back to 2008, detailing what the Trump administration considers unpaid European debts to American taxpayers. The confrontation escalated rapidly. Von der Leyen, visibly shaken but attempting to maintain diplomatic composure, tried to redirect the conversation toward mutual benefits and shared democratic values. Trump's response was swift and devastating. He cited specific figures: $127 billion in trade imbalances, $89 billion in NATO defense shortfalls, and $34 billion in what he termed green energy subsidies that directly compete with American industry. But the nuclear moment came when Trump referenced Article 5 of the NATO treaty, suggesting that European nations had failed to honor their commitments when America needed them most. Intelligence leaks from inside the meeting reveal that von der Leyen attempted to present a counterargument focusing on European contributions to global security and humanitarian aid. Trump's team was prepared for this approach. National Security Advisor Michael Waltz produced satellite imagery and financial tracking documents allegedly showing European funds being redirected to programs that, according to the administration, actively undermine American economic interests. The evidence was so specific and damaging that von der Leyen's chief of staff was seen frantically texting on his secure phone. The rejection wasn't just diplomatic, it was personal and devastating. Trump reportedly told von der Leyen that her commission had betrayed the trust of the American people, and that any future cooperation would require what he called complete financial transparency and immediate corrective action. He gave the European Union a 72-hour ultimatum to provide detailed accounting of all American aid received since 2020, and a concrete plan for addressing the alleged financial imbalances. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Von der Leyen's delegation was escorted out of the White House without the traditional photo opportunity or joint statement. Within minutes, European markets began a freefall. The euro dropped 2.3% against the dollar in the first hour following leaked reports of the failed meeting. Frankfurt's DAX index plummeted by 4.7%, while London's FTSE 100 suffered its worst single-day loss in 8 months. Investors understood what politicians were still trying to process. The transatlantic alliance was effectively over. Behind closed doors in Brussels, panic was setting in. Emergency calls between Emmanuel Macron, Olaf Scholz, and Mario Draghi painted a picture of desperation. Intercepted communications revealed Macron shouting in French about American betrayal, while Scholz reportedly threw documents across his office in Berlin. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni was heard telling her advisors that the Americans have lost their minds. Sources within the European Central Bank confirmed that contingency plans were being activated to prevent a complete economic meltdown. ECB President Christine Lagarde was spotted entering her Frankfurt headquarters at 11:30 p.m., accompanied by a convoy of security vehicles and emergency financial analysts. The reality was stark. Europe had built its post-war prosperity on the assumption of American partnership, and that foundation had just been demolished in 34 seconds. The Trump administration's strategy became clearer in the hours following the rejection. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt announced that the United States would be reevaluating all existing agreements with the European Union. This wasn't diplomatic language. It was a declaration of economic war. Trade relationships worth over $800 billion annually were suddenly in jeopardy. Defense partnerships that had defined NATO for decades were being questioned. Climate agreements that took years to negotiate were being dismissed as European propaganda. Intelligence sources reveal that Trump's rejection was based on a classified intelligence assessment titled European Economic Warfare: How Brussels Undermines American Prosperity. The document, compiled over 6 months by a joint task force including the Treasury Department, Department of Commerce, and CIA economic analysts, allegedly provides evidence of systematic European efforts to disadvantage American businesses through regulatory frameworks, tax policies, and trade restrictions disguised as environmental or safety measures. The human drama of the moment cannot be understated. Von der Leyen, a seasoned politician who had navigated complex negotiations with Putin, Xi Jinping, and previous American administrations, was reportedly visibly shaking as she left the White House. Witnesses described her as looking utterly defeated and completely unprepared for the ferocity of the American position. Her security detail had to physically steady her as photographers captured what would become the defining image of the end of European influence in Washington. Trump's inner circle was jubilant. Sources describe a celebration in the West Wing, with senior advisors congratulating the president on what they called the greatest negotiation victory in American history. The administration viewed von der Leyen's rejection not as diplomatic failure, but as the first step in restructuring global power dynamics to favor American interests exclusively. They had successfully called Europe's bluff and exposed what they considered decades of financial freeloading. The ripple effects extended far beyond economics and diplomacy. NATO's command structure was thrown into immediate crisis. General Christopher Cavoli, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, was reportedly summoned to emergency consultations as the alliance's fundamental assumptions were challenged. Defense contractors across Europe saw their stock prices collapse as investors realized that American military cooperation could no longer be taken for granted. Von der Leyen's flight back to Brussels was described by her staff as the longest 7 hours of her political career. Flight attendants reported that she refused all meals and stared blankly out the window for hours. Her secure satellite phone rang every 12 minutes with calls from desperate European leaders. She spent the journey in emergency consultations, her voice reportedly cracking during a heated exchange with French Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu about NATO contingencies. Staff members described her as a ghost of her former self, trying to develop a response strategy to what many were already calling the Trump Doctrine, a complete reimagining of America's relationship with the world based purely on transactional benefit to the United States. The European response was fractured and confused. While some leaders called for immediate retaliation through trade restrictions and financial sanctions, others advocated for desperate attempts at reconciliation. The fundamental problem was clear. Europe needed America far more than America needed Europe, and Trump had just made that reality impossible to ignore. Financial markets continued their downward spiral as the week progressed. European government bonds reached crisis levels as investors questioned the continent's ability to maintain economic stability without American partnership. The European Central Bank was forced to implement emergency liquidity measures reminiscent of the 2008 financial crisis. Rating agencies began downgrading European sovereign debt, citing unprecedented geopolitical uncertainty and fundamental shifts in transatlantic relations. Intelligence reports suggest that China and Russia were monitoring the situation with intense interest. Beijing saw an opportunity to fill the vacuum left by American withdrawal from European cooperation, while Moscow viewed the transatlantic split as validation of its long-term strategy to divide Western powers. Both nations reportedly reached out to European leaders within hours of the White House rejection, offering alternative partnerships and economic arrangements. The ultimate question facing global observers wasn't whether Trump's rejection would have consequences, but whether those consequences would reshape the entire international order. Von der Leyen had walked into the White House representing the dream of continued Western unity and cooperation. She walked out representing the harsh reality that America under Trump viewed Europe not as a partner, but as a competitor that had outlived its usefulness. The 72-hour ultimatum was ticking down, and European leaders faced an impossible choice: submit to American demands and acknowledge their dependence, or resist and face economic isolation from the world's largest economy. Either path would fundamentally alter Europe's role in global affairs and confirm what many suspected but few dared to acknowledge: that the age of European influence in American decision-making was definitively over. As markets continued to plummet and diplomatic channels remained frozen, the world watched and waited to see whether von der Leyen's humiliation in the Roosevelt Room would mark the beginning of a new era of American dominance or the catalyst for European independence that the continent had never quite managed to achieve.